I've lived all my life in this country. I love every flower and tree. I expect to live here till I'm 90. It's the nukes that must go and not me. It's the nukes that must go and not me. My friends, the nukes that must go and not me. I expect to live here till I'm 90. It's the nukes that must go and not me. I've swallowed enough radiation. It's time I was standing my ground. We are joining that grand occupation. We're shutting that power plant down. Sing that. We're shutting that power plant down, my friends. We're shutting that power plant down. We're joining that grand occupation. We're shutting that power plant down. Now Seabrook, New Hampshire's a swell town. It's there that we're taking our stand. Why sit home and wait for a meltdown? Come fight for your freedom and land.
I want to welcome to Old Clams, Eric Wolf, who is a videographer who just produced a wonderful documentary, Acres of Clams, and Kathy Wolf, you know, who did a lot of press and stuff back in the day with Clamshell Alliance. So welcome to our show today.
Thank you, Deb. I just want to point out that we like to call ourselves seasoned clams, not old clams.
Oh, yes. Seasoned. Very good. I love that. Can we share this a little bit, Rick?
Sure.
My co-host here is Rick Hunt.
Hello and welcome.
Sitting in the background is Carolyn. Let me so you can wave hi to Carolyn. Hello. Yeah. All right. So you can see our radio station here, and we're trying to produce this show weekly. And I was so inspired, Eric, I have to tell you. I said I'm going to be focusing on this topic for a while because I think folks need to hear about it because plutonium doesn't go away. It's sitting, right there on the seacoast. And I really enjoyed your documentary. What a great job you did writing the script, narrating it all. Just fantastic.
Well, thank you very much.
It brought a lot of smiles to, I know, people that were in it, of course, and so it was really enjoyable, and I keep sharing it. People are saying they like it. They thank us for sharing the link. People are learning stuff, and and one of the first questions that you wanted to answer was why make a movie about Clamshell Alliance? I know you've had some time to think about it, Eric Wolf. So,
well,
why?
Yeah, I asked myself that, especially during the 3 years that it took me to make it. I asked that question quite frequently. But first, I just want to say how grateful I am for your program and the opportunity to be here. Especially in the immediate wake of Paul Gunter and Nelia Sargent, who are two of my personal heroes. Mm-hmm. And they have brought so much to this struggle and continue to do so. And they're part of the reason that I call my experience with Clamshell really the most exciting thing that ever happened to me in my life outside of raising a family. To be part of a movement where people are all moving in the same direction, trying to coordinate their spirits as well as their bodies in advancing a social goal. That was an exhilarating feeling. And exhilarating is a word that you hear a lot when people talk about their experience back then. So, I wanted, of course, to be part of the movement to in nuclear power. That's what brought me into Clamshell. And I think the other thing that really moved me and impressed me about the organization and my experience with it was we wanted to model a new society. We wanted to embody the kind of change that we were seeking. So I always figured that I'm a writer. I figured someday I would write something, a memoir or, something. And then about 3 years ago, I learned how to obtain about 10 to 20 hours of oral video histories that were done with CLAMS back in the early 2000s, including me. I sat for a brief interview for that. So I got hold of those and I tracked down photos because I knew a lot of the photographers from back in that day. And there were a lot of video clips out there. There were 2 previous documentaries made with a lot of good footage. So I decided to heck with writing a memoir. I'm going to try making a movie. And to be clear, I've not made a movie before. So it was, a somewhat daunting task that I undertook, but it was immensely gratifying.
Oh, good work. It's so excellent. Kathy, when you first saw the documentary, what did you think?
I thought that Eric, first of all, thank you again for inviting us. And secondly, Eric and I share a last name, but we're not related. However, we also share a middle name. So we often were known as the Willis Wolves. We both have Willis as a middle name.
Wow.
When I first saw the film last summer, it caught so beautifully the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
It could have slipped into nostalgia, and it did not. It told the story, but it also captured the lightness and the passion of what it meant to be part of that 50 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. It did, and it was very positive. And I thought it also spoke to, the commitment to nonviolence and what that looked like back in the day. And Eric, the actions that you took and the puppetry shows that you did, the across the state with the covered wagon, they were all kind of acts of nonviolent actions that made up, when you look at that time period, help make it up. Can you talk about some of your experiences back in the day, Eric, and and how that has influenced your life today and keeps you inspired to finish this movie in 2025? Here we are.
Well, there was so much serendipity in the clamshell experience. We called it clam magic because magical things just kept happening. Your question just called to mind an experience I had on the covered wagon. We walked all the way across the state. Except the person who drove, guided the horse, and I held the reins as often as I could. But we walked across the state, and New Hampshire, you're in New Hampshire, I'm not there anymore, but we went down roads where, they were kind of like highways, but really they were just roads and with houses on them, and you could stop and talk to people who were out in their yard. And I remember one guy, he was out in his yard, and I went over and started, practicing rehearsing my speech, the things I wanted to say about nuclear power, and he just kind of looked at me for a while and wasn't responding. And finally, he just looked at me and smiled and he said, "Did you ever see a dog climb a tree?" And I thought, well, no, I can't say that I ever have. And he just beckoned me over. He whistled to his dog, and the dog proceeded to climb up. I think it was some kind of pine tree. And it was unbelievable. It was impossible. I was dumbfounded. And then he looked at me with this look on his face like, "So what is it you want to tell me?" I couldn't say anything. But so it was every day. It was a different experience. And I think it exemplified what it's like to immerse yourself in a movement. You've got to be open to, the experiences you have, the people you meet, and, respond however you can.
Hmm. Kathy, your work was kind of a little bit more serious. You were involved in letting officials know, the governor, police officers, let them know what was going to be happening. And what was that like for you?
I was I was part of the office collective,
Yeah.
basically, so it wasn't just me doing that kind of contact work, just to clarify. Um, it was interesting for me because only a few months before the 1976 occupations, I had been an Associated Press reporter. And I had quit that job partially because I'd grown quite tired of saying allegedly about everything, and I wasn't sure what I wanted. I wanted to collect sunsets and write fiction, but I had friends in the Granite State Alliance, and I was going to some of their meetings. I was helping edit some of their newsletters, and uh, and right then things heated up because a construction permit was issued for Seabrook that spring. Um, so I got involved, and it was a completely new flavor of life for me. I mean, I had been for the previous 10 years, whatever, the objective reporter, not engaged. It ultimately meant I'd never have a job in straight media in New England again, and I never did. But I could have gone to another part of the country and worked for sure. Um, but I wanted to stay here. So initially, nonviolent civil disobedience struck me as a absolutely wonderful tactic. But it also was one, there was a reason I didn't participate I didn't get arrested August 1st or August 18th in 1976. Is I thought if a police officer laid his hand on me, I would probably deck him. And I wasn't proud of that feeling, but it was there. And part of dealing with that particular tactic is being really honest with yourself as well as with the people that you're working with. I'm sorry, what was your question?
You're answering it. I just wanted to hear, what your experience was like for you. And I think that in gleaning some of the stories that are posted on the Clamshell Alliance website, it's clamshellalliance.com. There's stories, and we read, because we focus a lot here, Moccasin Tracks, on Native issues. We read a little bit of what Winona LaDuke wrote, probably 25 years or more ago, how that affected her, just her humanity, and the way that, she experienced clamshell, and those she was a student at, I think, Harvard at the time, and she went to the 77 action and was so impressed that even dozens of years later, she still held those kind of values. And I hear you saying a similar thing, and also Eric saying a similar thing here. And so I just wanted you to, talk a little bit more about that, because I think as we move forward, what we bring with us from these past experiences will, be really important for everyone in the community, and in the larger community as well. And I think that's what's, you know, important for me personally. I think, we all want to hear how we can move forward together. And these experiences that you share about Clamshell are really inspiring.
Well, for me, I think if we're talking about kind of the legacy or what Clamshell's
Mm-hmm.
long-term influence on me, it was the possibility of hope. Hope that you can change the world, and the understanding that in order to do one way to do that is through collective action. I think for young people today, I mean, I raised 3 kids and they're all still reasonably young adults. It's easy to feel kind of adrift and powerless in today's society. There are, so many overwhelming problems, and yet, there's still a tendency to tell young people, if you're a parent, just shut up and get a job, fit in. And I think in Clamshell, it was possible for every clam to feel like they belonged somewhere. They had reinforcement from, because all our modus operandi was to organize people into affinity groups. And you trained together and you acted together, and in actions you knew you had people who had your back. So that sense of feeling, adrift or hopeless or powerless or alone, that got remedied by going out and making yourself not alone, through your affinity group and then the larger organization. And you knew that people had your back. I think another element of that was our commitment to consensus decision making. Everybody had a voice, and there's nothing more disempowering than to be part of an organization where you were ignored and don't have any say. It's a kind of a fundamental principle of democracy, not just voting, but people have a say, they have a voice. And then I think the thing that went along with that, in terms of empowering people, was our commitment to nonviolence was a source of strength. It wasn't just like some passive thing. It was very, very active. And it's a very hard thing to describe. And, maybe Kathy will want to take a stab at it as well. But in the movie Acres of Clams, I quote Suki Rice at some length. She was our lead trainer. She was a Quaker living in Cambridge, and she did a lot of the training. She trained trainers so that we had a whole team of people to do the training for these big actions. And Suki said, relate to everyone as a person, as an individual, regardless of their role. Make eye contact, speak from the heart, diffuse tension by being human, and give every person you meet the chance to be human too. And I think that was kind of our modus operandi, and I think it's a good guide for today. I encounter groups today who say, "Don't talk to the police, whatever you do," and I'm thinking, well, I don't know. I think I want to have communication with everybody. I want to treat them as a human being. So it's not just, nonviolence is not just being nice. It is empowering us to confront the powers that be, but on our own terms, rather than throwing bricks and getting gassed. We create situations where there could be dialogue. At least that's what we tried to do, and I think to a great extent we succeeded.
We ran workshops not only extensively in nonviolence, but also in dealing with the media. For instance, we didn't have what Eric just alluded to, that he's run into, rules on who could speak to a reporter and who couldn't. In fact, we encouraged people to talk, but with the understanding and the underlying of the shared principles. One of the strengths I saw in nonviolence, and in some degree to a lesser extent in consensus decision-making, is the removal of competition. There wasn't a lot of interpersonal competition, at least in the 76, 77. 78 changed in a whole lot of different ways as we moved toward another occupation. But there was an allegiance to this Quaker-based process of consensus decision-making that took often 4-hour, 8-hour, and excruciatingly long meetings. But I wanted to echo what Eric said, is everybody belonged. Coming out of a newsroom, a straight job, into a collective of people who were kind of alternative to one degree or another, I was quite surprised at being embraced. And I knew some of it was because I knew how to deal with media, but most of it was because people just held each other. And that meant a lot.
Yeah. I guess go ahead if you want to interject something here, Deb.
Oh, it's just that I think even in the documentary, Eric, you have someone saying about kindness, that everyone was kind to each other, and there was that room to hear each other. There was a consciousness to really listen. So That's why I love the documentary so much, is that, you allowed people to really speak their hearts. Those little interviews that you put all together, that says something about the collective.
That's right. The videographer on that, for the most part, was a clam named Steve Thornton. And he spent 5 years up at the World Fellowship Center, every summer recording those interviews.
Oh,
And
okay.
and when I kind of let people know that I was starting to, put them together into a documentary, I
Mm-hmm.
got an email from him that just said, "Finally."
Oh,
so,
great.
so,
Yeah,
uh, so a shout out to Steve for the years of labor he put into creating that documentary record.
good for
What
him. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
another thing, in just responding, hearing Kathy talk, and the allowing voices to emerge and rise and be honored. I think that also had something to do with the emergence of women in our clamshell movement in leading roles. Nelia Sargent, who was your guest here a week or two ago, was an incredibly inspirational figure. The Quaker trainers Suki Rice and Elizabeth Boardman, and Western Massachusetts, Anna Georgie was a major leader. Kathy, was a major media spokesperson for us. And I mean, I could go on and on. It was not a tokenism thing. The I mean, there were great, courageous male actors in this too, but I think of Clamshell as having a very feminist sort of core, just by virtue of the fact that women seized the leadership. They didn't ask permission; they took on leadership roles, and I think that changed all of us just to kind of experience that, because I wasn't used to it in the anti-war movement. It seemed very male dominated.
It's the
Mm-hmm.
anti-war
Kathy.
movement is one of the reasons that evolved that way.
Yeah.
Women involved in the anti-war movement in Vietnam, anti-war movement, and that was the age we were, realized how male-dominated a lot of that was. It was at the same time of the rise of new feminism. And I think that we clearly, or it wasn't as much conscious as individual consciousness that wasn't going to happen with this particular movement. It was interesting that the local people that from the Seabrook area, Hampton, Seabrook, that were brought forward and that were most supportive were all women. Joan Bigler, Shirley Gustafson, Diane Garand. Yeah, and that made a big difference too. I also just want to go really back quickly because I think Paul and Nelia acknowledged this plenty in the interview you did with them, but I don't believe it was real common to have, I can't remember what they call them now, but statements, acknowledgments of land, acknowledgments to Native Americans of you're where you lived, owned, and etc. Not owned, that's not a word I would use. But from August 1st, August 22nd, 1976, 1977, it was always part of what we had to say and always had a speaker addressing that issue too, because it was uncovered, I believe, by an archaeological group out of UNH that it had been a Native American burial ground, an indigenous burial ground.
Yeah, I hope we can find out more information about that, because that continues to be an issue across Indian country, to protect the sacred sites, to acknowledge the burial grounds, and it's just happening everywhere. And we always try to acknowledge that this land where we're broadcasting from is actually ancestral territory of the Abenaki people. And my friends here are of the Abenaki community. So it's really something that we just, acknowledge, and, we just offer that to our listeners to encourage people to think a little bit more deeply about history and what you have given us is really the people's history. And so, it's really an honor to be able to talk about this with you, Eric. Um, you might have some favorite stories that you haven't told yet that maybe you've put aside. Kathy, did you put aside some favorite stories?
There's so many, right, Kathy?
Yeah.
I suppose that going in to see the governor, some of the things that happened in the armory, of course, was its own league of lore, and each armory was different. I had the honor of getting to spend several nights in Concord, even though I was incarcerated at Somersworth Armory. And Concord, the whole tenor felt different than Somersworth. You had this incident in Concord, and this is hearsay to me, but several people have told me, called the Haagen-Dazs 2. The National Guard was so laid back in the Concord Armory that two occupiers just wandered away one night, bought ice cream, and wandered back. And they ended up being called the Haagen-Dazs 2. Nothing happened to them. And in the armory I was in, when they wanted to separate men and women because they were sleeping together, I guess. And we had a very long, that I think is mentioned in the movie, demonstration led by, it was organized by some folks from New York and also an affinity group called the Crumbs of Bliss from Illinois. And it was very, very powerful. And the National Guard gave up, as they had in Manchester, too. But I guess that my favorite story would be when 78 was approaching, and there was a lot of turmoil internally in the Clamshell, but also 78 or 77, Eric?
I don't know. What are you talking about?
Clams will die they'll go there and die on the site. When Robin Reed and I went to see
77, before the big one. Yeah.
Okay, so erase what I said about disunity internally. Headlines in the Union Leader were very alarming about people willing to die on the site, and there will be violence, and the red tide is coming, et cetera, et cetera. And they were echoed to some degree by the governor. So we decided in the office, maybe we should go talk to the governor. And I got nominated because he agreed to talk with me, partially because he remembered me from Associated Press days. He said, apparently the message came back to the office, of course I'll talk to Kathy Wolf. So I said, I'm not going alone. And Robin Reed went with me, and we talked to the governor with Tom Rath in the office, as Souter, the Attorney General, David Souter's representative, and Peter Thompson, the chinless son of the governor, the son of the governor, and Melvin. And we asked repeatedly, do you have any evidence? Oh, and I think Paul Doyen was there, the head of the state police, who was a really good guy. He was embarrassed by a lot of the rhetoric that was flying about. And they wouldn't give us any extra information. So we want to know if you have information on provocateurs or people who intend to be violent, because we have nonviolent ways of containing them. And we did. It was part of the training. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't say anything. So finally, it wasn't going to go anywhere. And as we were leaving, I went over, and I think this is in the movie too, so it feels really redundant, to the governor. And I just say, can we both agree not to control our rhetoric for the next few days? Because this was right on the eve almost of the occupation. And he just looked at me and he just nodded his head barely. Like just, and when we walked out of the office, and there was this massive media, many people I had worked with in the past there, and the Clamshell had not called them. This was not a publicity stunt in any way. So obviously the governor's office had let the media know, or had leaked, I don't know. Yeah. And one of the kindest things ever done to me by another reporter happened right then and there. I was a nervous wreck. I started reaching in my purse for a cigarette, and the photographer from the AP put down his camera, looked me in the eye, and went, and he was so right. I was still a smoker back then, but it was just a very generous act, and I appreciated it. Those are very silly little stories, but they're part of what I recall. There's many, many more. We were constantly opening our small apartments to people coming. I mean, people came from Western Mass 2-3 hours away for weekly coordinated communities, and down from Vermont and throughout Maine, etc.
Well, for me, the story that I come back to always is the Manchester Armory when after about 10 days of being in the Armory, there were still 400 or 500 of us there. And the National Guard commander, I think it was, came on the PA system one night and said that in the following morning, 33 people would be taken to trial. And he read out their names. And we knew from an experience the previous day at another armory that they were in the process of separating men from women, breaking up affinity groups by, you get people out of the armory, and when you're moving them, then you have control over their bodies and can keep them apart. So we were determined not to let this happen. We stayed up all night, 400 people or so, trying to reach consensus around what to do. And we came up with a strategy. And in the morning, the National Guard commander got on the PA system and started calling out the names. Well, we had organized those 33 people into the middle of the armory. They sat down, huddled together, and the other, 350 people or so huddled together around them. Everybody sitting down. Clams loved to sit because it's not inciting and it's more comfortable. And so we just packed around them. And every time the National Guard commander started calling out the names, we started singing louder. I mean, we were singing all the time. We were singing rounds, and the Movement for New Society was there and was, had taught us all these songs over a period of days. And I was even songs I didn't know the words to. I found myself singing the words because I will give you an example of a round. It went like this. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. I will never forget you. I will never forsake you. And I mean, I was crying because it was we were singing about the solidarity that we were manifesting there and our loyalty and love for each other. And after an hour or so of this, the National Guard commander stopped trying to call the names and just abruptly said, "Court's been canceled." And I just I was stunned. It's like, what do you mean court's been canceled? You break the law, you get arrested, you go to jail, and then you go to court and stand trial. You don't get to decide that you're not going to go to court, do you? But clearly that's what we had accomplished, and it made me realize that. I mean, I believe in the law. I believe in lawful behavior, but I also believe that there are higher laws that we sometimes have to answer to. And the system kind of has to respond to it in one way or another. And if you are organized enough and you can act as one and you are many, many bodies, it gives you a certain amount of weight and leverage to kind of create your own future. And I think that's what we were trying to do as a movement, is redefine the terms of engagement and try to, create our own sense of what reality we wanted to see. And it was nonviolent, it was communicative, and it was centered in love.
It's interesting that in Somersworth, we also, in our moment of protest, sang for 2 or 3 hours one song. Love, 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 love. People we are made for love. Love. I never want to hear it again in my life, but even though that was 50 years ago. And we faced outwards. We faced the National Guard that circled us from the outside, and we were surrounded in one big circle with all our shoes tied together in between us, or in the middle. And some of the National Guardsmen were crying. I mean, they were young guys there. I remember one of the funniest things I heard was in the court. Now, because I was one of the people that went to the federal court, Judge Bounds, I guess, courtroom every day in Concord. They'd pick us up in a paddy wagon and drive us across the state. We were trying to get ourselves out of jail. And the head of the National Guard, a guy who was a Greek restaurateur from Manchester, I want to say his name is Sistos, but I can't remember his name right now. He took the stand, and there'd come up a question of food or something. He said, "These people are very resourceful. They all brought food with them. Sir, Judge, you ever heard of couscous?"
Oh,
One of our lawyers, I don't know whether it was Nancy Gertner or Eric Davis, I think it was Eric, he turned around just so the judge couldn't see him, totally doubled over laughing.
yeah. Oh. Well, we don't have much time left. I just wanted to give you that warning, but we had one more question on your list here, Eric. What's going on the West Coast? And, was it different for you to experience some anti-nuclear movement on the West Coast?
Well, I mean, I've been involved in various different movements, and they all have their own distinctive identity. But I think the challenges that we face today are they're national and global in reach, and that it's important that people, wherever you are, start there. Look around. If you have concerns about these issues, find other people who share your concerns. And to the extent possible, start trying to do it face to face. Don't limit yourself just to Zoom calls. No offense for our medium here today. But it's important to meet face to face. I first got involved in Kansas, super progressive Kansas, right? There were people there who were concerned that I could relate to. And that's where I actually wrote my puppet show on nuclear power. But my point is, there are huge problems everywhere, but you find people everywhere who are concerned about those. So I urge people to, not that your viewership probably needs much coaching on this, but join a group. And if there isn't a group that you feel like joining, start one. Find just one other person, and start a group with some kind of goal. That addresses the problems we face, whether it's nuclear waste or climate change. It's okay to start small, but do something. Believe in your own power to change the world, because I've seen it. People united do have the power to change things.
Kathy?
I would echo Eric on act locally. Right now, especially in the situation we're in this country, action at the local and the state level is imperative. Right now, there are bills pending, one at least is being voted on today in Concord, that would not allow cities to be sanctuary cities, that would not allow communities to say to their police officers, "We will not cooperate with ICE." This is the issue that has engaged me for several years. I spent an hour and a half this morning with New Hampshire Immigrant Support Group on a Zoom meeting, that all these people locally around the state, Keene, Nashua, Littleton, Hanover, etc., are all working locally on those kind of issues, on that issue, immigrant rights. So I think that matters, and it's getting harder and harder not to be ad hominem, not to attack individuals of our leaders. People who've taken over Washington. But it's important to try. It's important to keep things on the issues.
Yes.
There's racism and it needs to be called out. There's xenophobia, it needs to be called out, but the people don't necessarily need to be called out. Their beliefs do.
Yeah. I want to thank you both for taking the time to be with us today. It's truly been an honor, and I encourage our listeners to check out Acres of Clams. It's a wonderful documentary, and I want to thank you again, Eric. Are you considering publishing the transcript? It was so wonderfully done. I don't know if you thought about that, but
no,
great,
I haven't.
Great reading. If you,
I'm open to suggestion. I think it really is an audio experience and visual experience. So I hadn't thought about that, but I would, if I could, make my closing comment a quote from our attorney back then, Eric Blumenson, and this appears in the movie. And he said, "You can't know what the consequences of a mass movement can be until you've tried." So I whatever your issue